The laptop screen glowed at 3 a.m., each word like a scalpel cutting through my chest. 23 dating profiles, all with her photos, all active within the last week. My hands trembled as I scrolled through message after message, conversations with strangers, plans to meet, lives she had invented. Lives that didn't include Raymond Harris, her husband of 20 years. Carrie, her name escaped my lips in a whisper as I stared at the Memphis skyline glittering outside my home office window, indifferent to my world collapsing. I'd only opened her laptop because mine was updating, and I needed to check a patient's test results before morning rounds. That's all. Now everything was shattering around me like the delicate cardiac tissue I worked with daily. One wrong move and it all falls apart. The messages went back months, years. An entire secret existence hiding in plain sight while I worked 60-hour weeks building my cardiology practice, while I climbed every professional ladder Memphis had to offer, while I believed we were living the dream. This isn't happening, I said aloud, as if speaking the words might make them true. My cardiologist brain kicked in, clinically noting my elevated heart rate, the crushing sensation in my chest. The irony wasn't lost on me, the heart specialist having his own heart attack. I closed the laptop and paced the room, lined with my achievements. Harvard Medical School diploma, board certifications, Memphis Business Journal's 40 under 40, awards that meant nothing now. The digital clock on my desk flipped to 4:15 a.m. In 3 hours I'd be standing in the hospital conference room presenting quarterly mortality statistics. In 4 hours I'd be performing a triple bypass on a 60-year-old father of 3. People's lives depended on me keeping it together. I splashed cold water on my face in the guest bathroom and stared at my reflection. At 44 I still looked younger than my years. Good genes, regular workouts, the privilege of success. But my eyes looked hollow, unfamiliar. Get it together, Raymond, I told myself. Deal with this later. The words sounded as empty as my marriage apparently was. The drive to Methodist University Hospital was a blur through the pre-dawn Memphis streets. I turned on the radio to drown out my thoughts. And that's when the old hymn came on, Great is Thy Faithfulness. My grandmother's favorite, the song she'd sing while cooking Sunday dinner in her small house in Orange Mound, telling me how Jesus would always be there when everyone else failed. I jabbed the button to change the station. Not today, Grandma, not now. The hospital's gleaming tower rose before me, anchoring the medical district. My name was on the building directory, Dr. Raymond Harris, Chief of Cardiology. I'd made it, everything I'd ever wanted. So why did it all suddenly feel so worthless? Somehow I made it through the morning. The board meeting was a fog of statistics and projections. During the triple bypass, my hand stayed steady even as my mind wandered to those dating profiles, to years of working late that were actually hotel meetings, to the elaborate deception that had been my marriage. By lunch I needed to tell someone or I'd explode. Dr. Larry Jenkins had been my colleague for 15 years. We'd started our residency together at Baptist Memorial, built our practices in parallel, shared cases and consultations. He was the closest thing I had to a friend in the insular world of Memphis medicine. I found him in the doctor's lounge, reviewing charts over a sandwich. Larry, can we talk? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Sure, Raymond. What's up? He looked concerned. I never initiated personal conversations. The Harris family had always been private, professional, controlled. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. Carrie's been living a double life. Online dating profiles, messages with other men, plans to meet them. I laughed bitterly. Turns out I don't know my wife at all. Larry's face shifted. Something flashed behind his eyes. Not surprise, but something else. Recognition. Man, that's rough. How'd you find out? I told him about the laptop, the late-night discovery, the profiles. With each word I felt more exposed, more vulnerable than I'd allowed myself to be since medical school. Larry nodded sympathetically, asked the right questions, but something felt off. His body language was too careful, too rehearsed. You gonna confront her? Larry asked, checking his watch. I don't know. I thought we were happy. I provided everything she could want. The house in East Memphis, the cars, the vacations. What more could she need? Larry nodded. Listen, I've got a patient. We'll talk more later. I should have recognized the distance in his voice. Should have seen it coming. 3 hours later I was called to the Chief of Staff's office. Dr. Eleanor Winters sat behind her mahogany desk, expression grave as a terminal diagnosis. Raymond, we need to discuss your situation. My situation? It's been brought to my attention that you're experiencing significant personal distress that might impact patient care. There are concerns about your emotional stability. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Who told you that? That's not important. What matters is ensuring you're fit to practice. I'm mandating a 2-week administrative leave. Larry. It had to be. The betrayal hit me like a defibrillator shock to an already damaged heart. I performed flawless surgery this morning. I protested. And we want to keep it that way. This isn't a request, Raymond. Your hospital privileges are suspended pending a psychological evaluation. Walking to my car in the physician's parking garage, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. 20 years of building a reputation, destroyed by one conversation with a colleague I'd trusted. My marriage was a lie. My friendships were apparently strategic alliances. My career was now in jeopardy. I sat in my BMW, unable to start the engine. Where would I even go? Home to Carrie? Back to work where colleagues were now undoubtedly whispering about Raymond Harris finally cracking under pressure. That's when I broke. Not with tears or rage, but with a quiet, devastating realization. I had built my entire life on things that could be taken away in an instant. 6 months earlier, life moved to a different rhythm for me. The rhythm of success, measured in surgical outcomes and professional accolades. I stood before the Memphis Medical Society's annual gala, accepting the Physician Excellence Award while 300 colleagues applauded from tables adorned with white linens and fresh orchids. This recognition belongs not just to me, but to my incredible team at Methodist University Hospital. I said into the microphone, my voice carrying the confidence of a man who had never failed at anything that mattered. And to my beautiful wife Carrie, who sacrifices so much to support my calling. The applause was warm, genuine. Raymond had earned every bit of recognition. Youngest chief of cardiology in the hospital's history, published researcher, community leader. The son of a postal worker and a school cafeteria cook from Orange Mound had risen to the pinnacle of Memphis society. Afterward, as Raymond and Carrie mingled with pharmaceutical executives and hospital administrators, he felt the familiar satisfaction of being exactly where he belonged. Carrie looked stunning in her designer dress, charming the wives of other physicians with stories of their recent trip to Napa Valley. Dr. Harris, your lecture series on preventive cardiology has been phenomenal, said the medical director of St. Jude. We'd love to have you speak at our next symposium. Raymond smiled, already mentally organizing his calendar. Success bred more success. Recognition led to opportunity. This was the life he'd dreamed of during those long nights in medical school, when he'd studied by lamplight in his tiny apartment, driven by the memory of his grandmother's prayers and his parents' sacrifices. You make it look so easy, Carrie said on the drive home, her hand resting on his thigh as they navigated the quiet streets of East Memphis. Nothing about this has been easy, Raymond replied, but he was smiling. Just focused. At home in their sprawling colonial, 5 bedrooms they'd never filled with children. A decision that felt practical when careers were soaring but sometimes echoed with emptiness in the quiet moments. Raymond loosened his bow tie and felt the weight of success settle around him like a familiar coat. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. Watched the news coverage of your award. So proud. Grandmother would be proud too. She always said God had big plans for you. Raymond stared at the message, something tightening in his chest. When was the last time he'd been in church? Really been there. Not just made appearances at Easter and Christmas to maintain community standing. When had he last prayed about anything other than successful surgeries? He pushed the thoughts away. God had blessed him with talent and opportunity. Working long hours to save lives was a form of ministry, wasn't it? But that night, as Carrie slept beside him, Raymond lay awake staring at the ceiling. The house felt enormous around them. Every room perfectly decorated but somehow hollow. They talked about patients and hospital politics, about vacation plans and social obligations, but when was the last time they'd talked about dreams, about faith, about the future beyond the next promotion? The warning signs were there, subtle as the early symptoms of heart disease. Carrie's increasing time spent on her laptop, her new interest in networking events and professional conferences, the way conversation had become transactional, schedules coordinated, tasks assigned, but little actual connection. You should go see Pastor Williams, Raymond's mother had suggested during their last phone call. He's been asking about you, says he hasn't seen you in church since Easter. Mama, you know how busy my schedule is. Lives depend on me being available. Your soul depends on you being available too, son. Raymond had deflected with a joke about already knowing the great physician personally through his work. But the conversation haunted him in quiet moments, during long surgeries, stuck in traffic, lying awake at 3 a.m., when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. The Memphis medical community was small, insular, Success was measured not just in patient outcomes but in social standing, charitable contributions, the right neighborhood, the right connections. Raymond had mastered this game perfectly, but lately, it felt increasingly hollow. Dr. Larry Jenkins had been his closest ally in navigating these waters. They'd started residency together, built their practices in parallel, referred patients to each other. Larry understood the pressure of being one of the few black physicians in their subspecialty, the extra scrutiny, the need to be twice as good to get half the recognition. You ever think about what comes next? Larry had asked during a recent golf outing at the country club they'd both fought to join 5 years earlier. Next? After we've climbed every ladder, won every award. What's the point of it all? Raymond had deflected with humor, as he always did when conversations turned too personal. But the question lingered. What was the point? He'd achieved everything he'd set out to accomplish. So why did success taste increasingly bitter? The billboard on Union Avenue had caught his attention that morning. Success without significance is failure in disguise. The church sign hit too close to home, and Raymond had looked away, pressing harder on the accelerator of his BMW. That same evening, while reviewing patient files in his home office, Raymond found an old bookmark his grandmother had given him on the first day of medical school. Proverbs 3:5-6. Embroidered in fading thread, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Raymond quickly tucked it away. He'd built his career on understanding, on knowledge, on skill. Trusting seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford in the operating room, where split-second decisions meant life or death. He didn't know then what was coming. Couldn't see that in 6 months his carefully constructed world would collapse in ways that would force him to confront the difference between achieving success and finding significance. That the heart he'd need saving wouldn't belong to a patient on his table, but the one beating in his own chest, broken, betrayed. The signs were all there, the growing distance from God, the marriage becoming a performance, the friendships based on utility rather than trust. But Raymond was too busy climbing to notice he was scaling a ladder, leaning against the wrong wall. 2 weeks into my administrative leave, the walls were closing in. I'd exhausted Netflix, reorganized my home office twice, and started projects around the house that Carrie and I had been discussing for years. But the busy work couldn't quiet the racing thoughts, or fill the growing void where my identity used to live. Dr. Raymond Harris, chief of cardiology, had been reduced to Raymond Harris, man with too much time and too many questions. That Wednesday, I drove to Shelby Farms for a walk, something I never did during my working life. The October air was crisp, and the trails were nearly empty in the midday heat. I was trying to clear my head when my phone rang. Dr. Patricia Williams, my attorney. Raymond, we need to meet. There's been a development in your situation. What kind of development? Not over the phone. Can you come to my office? An hour later, I sat across from Patricia's desk while she explained the unthinkable. A malpractice lawsuit had been filed against me by the family of Anthony Johnson, a patient who died 6 months earlier from complications following surgery. Standard procedure was to notify the patient's family about potential risks, obtain informed consent, perform the surgery with reasonable care. I'd done everything by the book. The family claims you were distracted during the procedure, that you missed obvious signs of complications, Patricia explained. They're alleging emotional distress due to your recent personal problems affected your judgment. My stomach dropped. That's impossible. I reviewed those surgical notes dozens of times. Everything was textbook. I know, but they have a witness willing to testify that you seemed emotionally unstable in the weeks leading up to the surgery. Who? Dr. Larry Jenkins. The words hit me like a cardiac arrest. Larry was going to testify against me. My colleague, my friend, the man I'd confided in about my marriage. Why would Larry do this? Patricia's expression was gentle but firm. Raymond, there's something else you need to know. The family's attorney is Thompson and Associates. Carrie's divorce lawyer is also Thompson and Associates. This isn't coincidence. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Carrie wasn't just ending our marriage. She was systematically destroying my career to maximize her divorce settlement. And Larry was helping her. How is that even legal? It's unethical but not technically illegal. Your wife provided them with information about your emotional state, your work habits, details about your finances. They're painting a picture of a physician in crisis whose judgment was compromised. I walked out of Patricia's office feeling like a dead man. 20 years of surgical excellence, thousands of lives saved, and now my entire career hung on the testimony of a colleague who'd apparently been working against me from the beginning. That evening, I sat in my home office, staring at the wall of medical degrees and certifications. Each one represented years of sacrifice, study, determination. My parents had worked 2 jobs each to help pay for my education. My grandmother had prayed over every test, every residency application, every milestone. What would they think now? My phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's number. "Baby, how are you holding up?" Her voice carried the weight of a mother's intuition. Word traveled fast in Memphis, especially in the tight-knit Black professional community. "I'm fine, Mama." The lie came automatically. "Raymond, I raised you better than to lie to your mother. Pastor Williams told me about the rumors circulating, about Carrie, about work." I closed my eyes. Of course she knew. "It's complicated." "No, it's not. You've gotten so far from God that you can't tell the difference between success and significance. Your grandmother always said pride comes before a fall. This isn't about pride. This is about my wife betraying me, and my colleagues stabbing me in the back. And what about you betraying yourself? When's the last time you talked to Jesus about anything that didn't involve your career?" Her words cut deep because they were true. I'd built my entire adult identity around professional achievement, social status, financial success. When those things started crumbling, there was nothing left underneath. That night, unable to sleep, I drove through the quiet streets of Memphis, past the hospital where I'd saved countless lives, past the country club where I'd celebrated promotions and closed deals, past the church where my grandmother had taken me every Sunday, where she'd taught me that God's love wasn't dependent on my performance. I found myself in the parking lot of Mount Olive Baptist Church, the small congregation where I'd grown up. The building looked smaller than I remembered, weathered but dignified. A simple sign out front read, "God's love never fails." Sitting in my car at 2 a.m., staring at that sign, the depth of my spiritual bankruptcy slammed into me. I'd spent 20 years trying to prove I was worthy of success, love, respect. But I'd never learned to receive those things as gifts from God rather than achievements to be earned. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Doc, this is Anthony Johnson Jr. Heard about the lawsuit. Want you to know my dad didn't blame you for nothing. He knew the risks. This ain't coming from our family." I stared at the message until my vision blurred. Anthony Johnson's son was defending me while my own wife and best friend were destroying me. The next morning brought the worst news yet. Patricia called with an update from the hospital's insurance company. Even if we won the malpractice case, the legal fees and damage to my reputation would make it nearly impossible to continue practicing in Memphis. Hospital administrators were nervous about liability. Other physicians were distancing themselves. "They're offering a settlement," Patricia said. "It includes your resignation from Methodist University Hospital and an agreement not to practice in Tennessee for 5 years. 5 years. It's career suicide, Raymond, but fighting this could mean complete financial ruin and permanent damage to your medical license." I hung up and walked out to my backyard, looking at the swimming pool we'd installed but rarely used, the outdoor kitchen where we'd entertained colleagues, the landscaped gardens that required a crew to maintain. All of it felt like props in a play I no longer wanted to perform. That's when my phone rang with the call that would change everything. "Dr. Harris? This is Detective Maria Santos with Memphis Police. We need to talk to you about your wife's relationship with Dr. Lawrence Jenkins." My heart stopped. "What about it? Can you come down to the station? There are some things you need to see." An hour later, I sat in a sterile interview room, while Detective Santos laid out printed emails, text messages and hotel receipts spanning 3 years. Larry and Carrie's affair. Their plan to destroy my career to maximize the divorce settlement. Their coordination with the malpractice lawyers. "Your wife and Dr. Jenkins have been planning this for over a year," Detective Santos explained. "What started as an affair became a conspiracy to commit fraud. They've been manipulating your finances, your medical records, even patient information to build their case. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I felt numb. These weren't crimes of passion but deliberate, methodical destruction of my life by the 2 people I'd trusted most. We're arresting them both tomorrow morning. But I wanted you to hear this from us first." I drove home in a daze. The house felt like a museum to a life that had never really existed. 20 years of marriage to a woman who'd been planning my destruction. 15 years of friendship with a man who'd been feeding information to my enemies. That night, I fell to my knees for the first time since college. Not the polite, formal prayers of my adult life, but desperate, honest pleading with God. What did I do so terrible that would make them do this? I whispered to the darkness. I gave her everything, worked hard, didn't cheat. I don't understand this kind of hate. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. But in that silence, something shifted. A memory of my grandmother's voice. When you reach the end of yourself, you find the beginning of God. I need you, Jesus, I admitted for the first time in decades. Help me, or I'll lose my mind. None of this makes sense. I'm not a bad person, not a perfect person either. But I try to do right by people. Help where I can. I broke down, wrapping my arms around my knees as I rocked back and forth. The house remained quiet around me. Snippets of conversations with Grandma and Mama rolled through my mind. Jesus is the only rock that doesn't roll. Place your trust in Christ alone. Jesus paid the ultimate price, proving his love for us. Take your burdens to the Lord and leave them there. I smiled slightly, hearing their voices in my head. Could I give this to Jesus in exchange for a sliver of peace? Leaning back, I closed my eyes and envisioned Jesus healing the blind and lame, telling people not to be afraid. Tall order when my world was falling around me. But I had nothing to lose, and everything to gain. Jesus, forgive me for everything. Please, I'm so tired. Help me sleep tonight. We'll deal with tomorrow. I yawned and pushed up from the floor as my eyelids grew heavy. I dropped onto my bed and fell asleep for the first time in days. The criminal charges against Carrie and Larry had been settled. She'd received 5 years of probation and community service. Larry had lost his medical license permanently, along with time served. The malpractice case had been dismissed when evidence of their conspiracy came to light. A week later, a desperate Carrie had shown up at my apartment with tears and explanations. She talked about feeling neglected, about my obsession with work, about how the affair had started as emotional support that spiraled out of control. She begged for another chance, promised counseling, swore the conspiracy was all Larry's idea. When I told her I forgave her, her face lit up with hope. But when I explained that forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation, that I was choosing to start fresh, her tears turned to anger. You're throwing away 20 years for your pride, she accused. But it wasn't pride anymore, it was peace. Methodist University Hospital had also come calling, hat in hand. Losing both their chief of cardiology and another prominent surgeon in such a public scandal had created a crisis they couldn't ignore. The medical director offered me my position back. A raise, even a formal apology from the board. We can't afford to lose someone of your caliber, Raymond, he'd said during our lunch meeting at the same country club where I'd once felt so important. But sitting across from him, I felt nothing. No vindication, no satisfaction, just a quiet certainty that this chapter of my life was closed. 6 months after my world collapsed, I stood on a beach in North Carolina, watching the sunrise over the Atlantic. Duke University Medical Center offered something Memphis never could, the chance to practice medicine as ministry rather than monument. In Durham, I was discovering what my grandmother always knew, that God's plans are often disguised as setbacks. I'd even started having coffee with Elena, a widow from church whose husband had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. She worked as a pediatric nurse and had the most genuine laugh I'd heard in years. Our conversations felt different than anything I'd experienced. Unhurried, authentic, built on shared faith rather than shared ambition. I started attending a small church in Durham where nobody knew Dr. Raymond Harris, chief of cardiology. They just knew Raymond, a man learning to trust God with his broken pieces. I began volunteering at a free clinic in the predominantly black community, using my skills to serve people who couldn't afford Methodist University Hospital's fees. The beach was nearly empty at sunrise, just a few joggers and dog walkers beginning their day. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app, where I'd been writing down thoughts for the testimony I'd been asked to share at my new church next month. I spent 20 years fixing broken hearts but never examining my own, I typed. I thought success meant having control over every outcome, but real success is surrendering that control to the only one who truly sees the big picture. A year ago, standing on this same beach would have felt like failure, exiled from my life in Memphis, professionally humiliated, financially diminished. Now it felt like freedom. Not because my circumstances were perfect, but because my identity was finally rooted in something unshakable. My phone buzzed with a text from Anthony Johnson Jr., who'd become an unexpected friend over the past months. Doc, wanted you to know I start medical school in the fall, going to be a cardiologist like my dad always wanted. Thanks for believing in me. I smiled, watching the sun climb higher over the ocean. The boy whose father's death had been used to destroy my career was now following in my footsteps. God's sense of irony was remarkable. Jesus, I prayed silently, thank you for loving me enough to give me time to come back to you. I'm so grateful. The waves rolled endlessly to shore, each one unique but part of an eternal rhythm. Like grace, I thought. New every morning, constant as the tide, available to anyone willing to stop running long enough to receive it. In losing everything I thought I wanted, I'd found everything I actually needed. And his name was Jesus.